The Illini made a big splash recruiting internationally this offseason, but how sustainable is that? Locked On Illini, let's go.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. A simple reminder, you can find us available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you'd like to support the channel, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Subscribe to us on your favorite audio platform. That's a big focus of this particular week. My name is Sunny Verma. You can find me at IlliniCast, and you can also find me at The Sunny V. I'd love to hear your feedback on the show. Just a simple reminder, the show is not my show, it's your show. So if there's a topic you want to talk about, please seek me out and let me know. We got a fun one for you today. We're talking about the Illini coming up with 3 of the top 10 international recruits this upcoming season. And we're going to talk about the feasibility of sustaining that sort of recruiting prowess. And also Aaron Henry on Tuesday had his media session, and he has some interesting things to say. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So late last week, a Twitter account called NBA Draft Point, which if you don't follow now and you're even remotely interested in basketball, college basketball, international recruiting, that's the go-to. He's actually one of the guys who introduced me to who Kasparas was. It was his scouting reports that I was reading when I was trying to learn more about KJ, obviously after the whole Deneen thing fell through. And me and him, we've had some conversations privately, just a super knowledgeable guy and a guy who you all should absolutely follow if you use X. Well, he ranked some of his top international freshman prospects coming into college basketball next year. And there were some familiar faces in the top 10. Number 1 overall was Will Riley. Number 3 overall was Kasparas Jakucionius. And number 8 was Tomislav Ivisic. So, I mean, I'm selling myself short here when I say 3 of the top 10. It's actually 3 of the top 8 international prospects are coming to Champaign to play basketball next season. So what does that mean? It's funny, I want to say halfway through the summer, a lot of Illini fans were panicking. At that point, it was only Ivisic who had really signed on. We were kind of missing the star caliber players that next year's team probably needed. And quite honestly, the recruits locally were starting to dry up. AJ Storr decided to play for Kansas. David Jones decided that if he was going to come back to college, he would stay at Memphis, and then ultimately sticking it out in the NBA. It looked like that Brad Underwood failed. So much so, I created a video saying, did Brad Underwood fail this offseason? And it was only a couple days later that we finally heard that the coaching staff had been out in Europe scouting this 6'9" point guard named Igor. And all of a sudden, ears perked up, and you saw that Brad Underwood, like he usually does, was willing to switch up his strategy a little bit. And so him, the staff, Jeff Alexander practically owns a timeshare out in Europe. He's out there so often. Well, things obviously didn't work out with Igor, but that doesn't mean that things didn't work out, period. We switched on over to Kasparas being an international recruit himself. And then after KJ eventually committed, we also ended up landing Will Riley, seemingly out of nowhere. So how sustainable is this? Truthfully, I think we're going to find out this year. The more I think about it, I think that the results on the court are important in many different aspects. Obviously, we had an Elite 8 run last year, and if we were to kind of fall on our faces and have a year similar to 2 years ago where we had some pretty big names on the team, but ultimately the chemistry issues did not work out and the team flamed out. If that were to happen next season, I think we could potentially be in trouble. But if we're going to be honest, Europe right now is going to be paying attention to the Illini. Tomislav, Kasparas, Will Riley. Right now, we have the opportunity to build a sort of pipeline to that Barcelona team out there, which is routinely one of the best teams in Europe. If Kasparas thrives in Brad Underwood's system, if Kasparas gets along with the coaching staff and we're able to develop him, whether it's in 1 year or 2 years, to his maximum skill set, and he's able to jump to the next level, jump to the NBA, that's nothing but positive things for Brad Underwood in future recruiting. That's going to establish a pipeline out there in Spain or Lithuania, where Kasparas is actually from. Those type of coaches, they're going to be watching their young kid play basketball this upcoming season. And if we fail, if we don't do a good job, if Kasparas has bad things to say, well, then guess what? The next big prospect that Barcelona is going to have, they're going to steer away from Champagne. Now, and the same goes for Canada. Will Riley, obviously Canadian. There's a lot of talent up in Canada, and it's been growing exponentially over the last 10 to 15 years. And if Illinois can establish itself as one of the safe grounds for Canadian players to take a look at, well, guess what? That's two markets, both the European and the Canadian, that are going to look at Illinois. Now, keep in mind, domestically, it's hard pressed for when Illinois pursues a 5-star, when a Kentucky comes calling, or when a Kansas comes calling, or when a North Carolina comes calling. If you grew up here in the United States of America, you know that those are kind of the blue bloods, the bluest of blue bloods. So it's hard to compete against teams like that for American talent. But talent out there in Spain or other places in Europe, they're not aware of it. Sure, they know North Carolina is a prominent name. Sure, they know Kansas is a prominent name, but not to the effect that the players here do. We sometimes forget that a lot of these kids are 15, 16, 17 years old. And making a drastic move, like jumping over an entire ocean, going from Europe to America, that's pretty nerve-wracking, especially for a young kid, especially for a teenager. What those kids want is familiarity. They want to feel comfortable. They want to be put at ease. And if Kasparas can go back and talk to the other kids out there, just really talk up and really hype up just how wonderful a time that he had in Champaign and how he felt like he was developed as well as he could be, that's going to give a sense of calm to not just the players out in Europe, but also the parents out there who might be scared of sending their kid thousands of miles across the ocean to play in the United States. Now, Illinois will always be involved when it comes to the international community. Well, they'll always be involved as long as we have Orlando Antigua and now Jeff Alexander on this coaching staff. Orlando Antigua has made his name recruiting guys not from the United States, and Jeff Alexander seems to really have developed a knack and a niche. Jeff and Orlando have spent the better part of the last couple of years making some very strong relationships overseas. And so I don't think Illinois at this point is ever going to not be recruiting internationally. But 3 of the top 8 in one season, that's tough. And that type of trajectory is only going to sustain itself if we are able to develop the 3 that we have coming in next year. Baseball season's not over yet, and should you decide to catch a game locally, just remember, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you caught Tuesday's episode of Locked On Illini featuring the magnificent Big Ten Ted, you saw us talking about not just the Illinois defense, but the Big Ten defense, the best Big Ten defenses in general. And it wasn't hard to see that I'm not exactly super enthusiastic about the defensive side of the football. And I think for the most part, there's going to be huge microscope on Aaron Henry. Aaron Henry, obviously entering his second year as defensive coordinator of our beloved, taking over for Ryan Walters. What can I say? The Illini defense faltered last year. I think they fell to 95th in the country, which is almost improbable considering we essentially had the best defense in the country the year before. So a lot of people were already taking a very close eye on Aaron. The question was, did Brett make a mistake here? Should he have hired Kevin Kane instead? Kevin Kane ultimately going with Ryan Walters to Purdue. But Brett seems very confident in Aaron Henry. And he's talked about how Brett himself, when he was a defensive coordinator, he made his biggest jump, his biggest leap in his second season at that position. And he's counting on Aaron to make a similar sort of leap. On Tuesday, Illinois had a media day, and they had Aaron Henry talk to the media about what they've kind of been seeing during this training camp. And if you watch the interview, which by the way, please do, you can't help but come away a little optimistic. Now, this is the coach's job, right? There's no one who's going to be coming in front of cameras, in front of microphones 2 weeks before the season and saying, hey, we're about to stink. We're about to be really, really bad on the defensive side of the football. Of course, it's their job to sell positivity. Of course, it's their job to put fans' nerves at ease. But I will admit that after watching that press conference, I do feel a little bit more optimistic. In particular, what jumped out at me was Aaron's enthusiasm for the two safeties, the two starting safeties for next year's team, which are projected at this point to be Matthew Bailey and Miles Scott. Aaron had this to say: I think that's a pretty fierce group. They communicate at a high level. They're all a tad bit different. I do lean a lot on Miles Scott and Matt Bailey because they probably are the ones with a little more experience. I do think that the guys who have been in the rotation with them have done a great job of taking heed to what they're saying because they have been in the fight. It's not a selfish group. Anytime you have a room of guys who want to see the other guy have success, I think that's literally the epitome of team, just from a defensive perspective. It's been truly a blessing to see guys grow each and every practice. It's been fun to watch. The secondary, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, I think is going to be one of the keys to this football team next year. That defense, we're counting so much on that defensive line to thrive because we're all worried about giving wide receivers too much time against our secondary. Again, a shame considering what our secondary looked like 2 seasons ago, but we do have talent in the defensive backfield. We just need to trust it, and trust it seems to be what Aaron Henry is doing. Matthew Bailey, obviously, we just are hoping can stay healthy this season, and if he paired with Miles Scott can really help shore up that defensive backfield, especially with Terrence Brooks on one of the corner spots. If we can just be average in our cornerback rooms, that's going to be a complete win for Brett and the program, especially compared to what it looked like a month and a half ago before Brooks had committed to Champaign. Aaron also mentioned that they haven't quite decided as a defensive staff who will be wearing the green helmet for the coach to player in helmet communication. They've kind of moved that green dot around to different players. Brett did say a couple weeks ago that he thought that the safety group would be the first one to have it. They haven't made that decision yet. It's something that they're going to continue to play with during camp. Season is just over 2 weeks away, so decisions are going to have to be made soon. And so expect that to be resolved quickly. All in all, again, Aaron Henry is one of those guys where you can't help but root for him. He seems like a genuinely good guy. Obviously, he's the guy who played for Bret Bielema back in the day. And you can see why Aaron Henry is such a good recruiter. He's so personable. You genuinely believe all the words that are coming out of his mouth. But quite honestly, at this point, with this season being so important for Bret Bielema, it's pretty much a make or break year for Aaron Henry. And if Aaron and the defense continue to struggle in his second season as defensive coordinator, I don't see him getting a chance at a third. Thank you for making Locked On Illini your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and wherever you get podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The first college football AP poll was released on Monday, and it basically confirmed that the Illini have one heck of a tough path ahead of them this upcoming season. In fact, there's a 4-game stretch where they play at Penn State. We have Michigan at home, and then we go at Oregon. Obviously, it looks tough on paper because it is tough, but I don't necessarily think that's the end of the world. I don't know if there's any season, at least in the upcoming couple seasons, where Illinois is ever going to be favored to beat a team like Penn State, Michigan, or Oregon. But what that does tell me is that games against teams like Kansas, teams like Purdue, teams like Nebraska are going to be more and more important. Like those games, in particular, Nebraska and Kansas, were probably going to be touchdown plus underdogs in. But if this team is to be able to hit that 6 wins to make it to a bowl game, we're going to have to win some of those games against the middle tier Big Ten teams. I really think that a loss to Purdue in this upcoming year could really spell doom for Bret and the staff moving forward. Now, nothing's going to happen this year. Obviously, Bret has a very lucrative contract, one that I don't think Illinois is ready to kind of pay off. And I don't necessarily even want to think that way. Any of you fans of the show know I'm a big Bret Bielema guy. But I'm just saying that I think with the loss to a team like Purdue, if you lose to Purdue and then you win 3 or 4 games this upcoming season, you lose a ton of momentum because it's teams like Purdue, teams like Nebraska that you're competing for talent with. And if you continue to falter while the other 2 programs are on a very obvious trajectory upwards, it's going to make it all the more harder to get the players you need to beat those teams to come to Champaign. That just about wraps it up for today's Locked On Illini. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please, on your way out, again, we're so close to 1,000. Take a look. Whoever's watching at this point, see if we've hit 1,000 yet. If we have not hit 1,000 subs, get me one closer. It's amazing to me, but checking out the analytics, something like 68% of the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed. I'm not sure why. If there's something more you want me to do, please let me know. I make the show for you guys. On the audio side, same thing. If you're a YouTube watcher, please, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, go on that app, give us a download. It really helps this channel grow, and it really helps the standing of the Illinois content here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We've got a couple more shows for you this week, basically highlighting more team previews, the upcoming football season, and of course, we'll always be talking Illini basketball. Until then, ILL, love you guys.